Hey guys, welcome to the video lecture on chapter 19, which will cover concepts called demand and supply elasticity. Just to get us thinking about these concepts, or to prime us for these concepts, in the past, Egyptian farmers who grew some of the world's highest quality cotton received a per unit subsidy of about 13% for producing cotton. Recently, the Egyptian government eliminated this subsidy, and the quantity of cotton supplied by Egyptian farmers dropped by about 33%. So that's interesting. The subsidy that they received dropped basically by 13%, and the quantity supply dropped by 33%. So basically what we're getting at here is what's called elasticity of supply. And so that's one of the things that we're going to learn in this chapter. So our learning objectives for this chapter are first to be able to calculate our first elasticity, the price elasticity of demand. And then in the next section, we're going to look at the relationship between price elasticity of demand and total revenues for a firm, the money that they earn by selling their product. In section 3, we're going to talk about the factors that determine price elasticity of demand. So what is it that determine what it is? In the fourth section, we will explain what we want to be able to explain what the cross price elasticity of demand is, and the income elasticity of demand. So two other elasticities is what we'll look at in section 4. And then in the last section there, not section 3, but section 5, that's a typo, we'll talk about the supply elasticities. And we'll talk about how the length of time for adjustment affects the price elasticity of supply. All right, so there's our outline for the chapter. Did you know that when the price of polyester used in clothing decreases by 10%, the amount of cotton demanded for clothing production increases by about 2.5%? So basically, again, what we're talking about here are elasticities. And this is in particular cross-price elasticity. So we're going to learn about what that means later. But again, what we're learning about is responsiveness, right? So what we're seeing is that there's a price change, and there's some change in quantity in response to the price change. So that's really what we're talking about here with elasticity. It's a measure of responsiveness, okay? So you can even think about it like the elastic band in your underwear, right? Or a rubber band. Those things are very elastic, so they're very responsive to you tugging on them. Whereas something like this pen here is not very elastic at all. If I try to apply some force on it, it doesn't really respond in any way. It pretty much holds its shape. So that's what we're talking about here is responsiveness in terms of quantity. Essentially. All right, so the first one, the first elasticity we're going to look at is price elasticity of demand. We will denote this as E sub P. And this is basically the responsiveness of quantity demanded given a price change, right? So it's defined, in fact, as a percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. So in terms of the equation, this is what it looks like, right? EP is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. So for a numerical example, suppose that the price of oil increases by 10%. What is the response in terms of quantity demanded? Well, quantity demanded decreases by 2%. So if we wanted to use these changes to calculate elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, we'd simply take the change in quantity demanded as a percent, -2, since it's a decrease, and divide that by the change in price, positive 10%. And that gives us an elasticity of demand measure of -0.2. Okay. So there's a numerical example. Here's another numerical example. So during a recent period, the nationwide price of a U.S. cable subscription increased by 6%, while the quantity of cable TV subscriptions demanded declined by 0.6%. Okay, so we can use these numbers to calculate the elasticity of demand, the price elasticity of demand for cable television subscriptions. So we would take the change in quantity demanded, negative 0.6, since it was a decline, and divide that by the change in price, which was positive 6. And that gives us negative 0.1 as the elasticity for this. So you're probably thinking, well, what is that number telling us? What does it mean? How do I interpret that? How do I interpret an elasticity of negative 0.1? Well, you can basically think of it like this. It means that a 10% increase in the price of oil, let's say, would lead to a 1% decrease in the quantity demanded. That's basically what it's telling us. Or if you don't, I'd actually prefer to think of it as, rather than a 10% increase, a 1% increase. So if there was a 1% increase in the price of oil, it would lead to a 0.1 decrease in quantity demanded. Right? So that's basically what it's telling us. If price changes by 1%, how does quantity demanded change? That's what it's telling us. And again, that change is in percentage terms. Now, it's important to know here that elasticities is telling us about relative quantities only. It's measuring the change in quantity relative to a change in price. So this is a relative measure. It's comparing change in price to change in quantity demanded as percentage changes. And something else you should know is that the price elasticity of demand is always negative. And this is because of the law of demand, right? As the law of demand, if you'll recall from chapter 3, states that when price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. And so these things always move in opposite directions. And so we will always get a negative number here. But by convention, a lot of times the negative sign is ignored because since it's always negative, we can kind of ignore it, right? We know it's negative. We know that they move in opposite directions. So just to save a little bit of pencil lead or whatever, we can basically ignore the negative sign.